The one who's the expert on the substance doesn't necessarily make you the best facilitator of the process. The whole point is to serve the group, not to tell them what direction they need to go.
We're talking today to Suzanne Ghais. She's a conflict resolution, facilitation, and international affairs expert, the executive director for Pathfinders for Peace Incorporated, principal at Ghais Mediation and Facilitation. She taught at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. And I'm just so thankful that you've agreed to be interviewed by me.
Great to be here, James.
I was first introduced to your work back in 2021 when I read this book, Extreme Facilitation, Guiding Groups Through Controversy and Complexity. At the time, I was in the Australian Public Service Commission. I was teaching executive leadership values and ethics, and I couldn't put the book down. It's full of tools, key points, and real deep insights, as well as cautionary tales into what it means to facilitate, especially in highly pressurized environments. And it's a book that I've returned to again and again. And I'd love to be able to talk to you a little bit about that. You mentioned that the extreme facilitator is an architect of a custom process, one designed to suit the group and the situation. And I really liked that. How can we build the profession and this recognition of the importance of professional facilitation skills?
Yeah, well, there's no better PR than a job well done, first of all. There is an International Association of Facilitators, which is a great association. That's who officially has the job of building the profession, and I think they do a really good job at it. And then I guess just talking to people and helping them understand what a facilitator is. And I think the basic metaphor when people think of a facilitator is a traffic cop. So just, you know, you're next to speak, you're next, oh, you're both talking at the same time, hold on a sec. So that's definitely part of it. Then I've also heard the metaphor of an orchestra conductor, which is one that I like. I love music. And the most important job of a conductor is the preparation and rehearsing the orchestra. And so there's a good parallel there in terms of once you walk into the room, if your preparation hasn't been good, there's no amount of this that's really going to rescue it. You mentioned how I had taught the Carter School, and the course I taught was facilitation skills. So I had the opportunity to go back to my book and think about what else I wanted to present. And I chose to include in the syllabus the book, How to Make Meetings Work by Doyle and Strauss. And I think that one was really important for my students to understand how revolutionary this concept was when they wrote the first edition of that book back in the 70s. Prior to that, people thought of the person at the front of the room as the leader. Their novel concept was to split the leadership role into two parts. One is the substantive leader and the other is the process leader. And the facilitator is that process leader. And I bring this up because I've occasionally had situations where someone thought that as the facilitator, I'm the boss, and I'm not the boss. Whatever authority I have is only insofar as the group has decided to give me that authority for the length of time of this meeting. And being, you know, the one who's the expert on the substance doesn't necessarily make you the best facilitator of the process. Standing at the front of the room and facilitating, it's a kind of leadership, but it's serving the group. The whole point is to serve the group, not to tell them what direction they need to go.
That's the piece that I love the most, that this is in service of this group's outcomes. It's in service of the leaders as well, because it's so much easier for them to be part of the process if they're not having to worry about the process. That's our role as facilitators, and that enables so many more benefits to the outcomes, to the participants, regardless of where they are in the hierarchy. And I think that that's an important part to remind ourselves as facilitators that we're doing this in service of. One of my friends, Julie Spark, who's also a co-chair for the Australian Government Facilitation Community of Practice, and she volunteers her time in addition to her day job at the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. She's got a question for you.
Hi Suzanne, I'm Julie Sparks. I'm one of the co-chairs of our Government Facilitation Community of Practice here in Australia. I really enjoyed reading your book, Extreme Facilitation, and looking forward to asking you about some insights you might have How do you ensure you are bringing everyone in the room on the journey to a facilitation session, especially if there are 2 to 3 people who want to be the focus and go off track? The other question I have is, what are some confidence building exercises that can be done when you're new to facilitation, or if there was a not so great facilitation event that you just had, and then you need to facilitate another session almost immediately, and to keep your confidence levels high? Thanks, Suzanne. I really look forward to hearing your insights.
All right, so 2 different questions there. So the first one is, if 2 or 3 people want the focus to be on them and they're going off track, that's a classic problem of individuals who are sort of dominating the conversation, as well as going off track. I think the most powerful tool is just to name what's happening. I would simply say, unless everybody really wants to shift to this topic, I suggest we put it on this flip chart here that we're calling parking lot, and come back to it at another time. Is that okay with you?
And there's a real power there in just naming something. Oh, yeah, that's right, we might be going off, and just the power of naming it without judgment, just discernment.
Yeah.
Has a real poignant effect to it, doesn't it?
And giving the group the option, because sometimes it's the unplanned conversations that people are like, wow, this is a conversation we've been really needing to have for months or years. And so I don't want to be the process Nazi, some people call it, who just rigidly sticks to the plan. But at the same time, I don't want to just drift without checking in and seeing if that's what everybody wants to do. Sometimes I say, do you all want to continue this conversation, or should we stick to what's on the agenda? And they'll nod. You get very quick feedback, quick reaction. As far as individuals who dominate, it's probably just a matter of personality, and it may also be a matter of status. Some people are just more vocal than others. Some people are happy just staying quiet and listening. I remember at one meeting, there was one person out of about 20 who really didn't say barely anything. So on a break, I just kind of knelt next to him and I said, hey, notice you haven't been saying much, which is okay, as long as you're comfortable. Is there any barrier for you, or are you fine? He said, no, I'm fine. I'm listening. Everything's good. So no need to push that farther. Occasionally, I have had to tell certain individuals that they are taking up a lot of airtime. I try to do that quietly during a break, just we need to hear from everybody. But also how you structure the conversation relates to that too. So if you have a lot of people, you want to be doing something other than just open plenary discussion at least some of the time. It's valuable to have some unstructured time, but those more vocal individuals are going to really tend to take over the larger the group is.
I think Julie had a question around confidence building as well.
Confidence. Yeah.
Well, what's some insights you might have in that space?
That was really my favorite part of the question, because it causes me to dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
I am not always the most confident person. I think I appear confident more than I actually feel confident. So I think for me, it's reminding myself that failure is necessary for growth and learning. What I try to remind myself when I have screwed up, and of course I have screwed up, is that it's an opportunity to learn. So I really have to kind of psych myself up. I actually give myself a moment to get in the right headspace, and I ask myself, what can I learn? What can I learn? What can I learn? And then the rest, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And then back to serving the group. It's really not about me. It's about them. So I try to own whatever mistakes I've made and say, okay, what should we do next? How can I correct it? And just move right along.
I find that if you can stay true to the intention of this is for service of the group, it helps remove even that self-judgment that takes place. You mentioned earlier this preparation. I want to help those that sponsor these facilitated events understand what can be expected. What's some of your insights in that space?
So I am both a facilitator and a mediator, and a lot of the work I do is in that space in between where, if there's conflict, you really need quite a lot of preparation, like individual interviews with people to assess where they've been and where they need to go. There's no formula. Sometimes I've been asked, well, is it like 2 hours of preparation to 1 hour of meeting, or Or what's the formula? And I can't answer that.
I like that. If this is the outcome we want to get, these are the things that I need to know as the facilitator and the designer of this process to make sure that we can get there.
It's the diagnosis part.
Yeah. Yeah. And that diagnosis is a critical component to then what is the antidote to achieve the results. Sometimes delegates will pull you in without really understanding what they want as the outcome, or perhaps they actually already have an outcome in mind and it feels a little bit like lip service to the participants. How do you help them to build the importance of genuine consultation and genuine facilitation?
Yeah, if you want buy-in, you have to give folks an opportunity to shape the decision that you are making. If it's just a question of you've already made the decision and it's truly non-negotiable, then you just need to communicate that and be above board about it. If you say that there is going to be a dialogue, then you need to be clear what's on the table, where could you change, what's the range within which it's fine, whatever the group tells you. And what are the sideboards? What are the non-negotiables related to that? And just be really super upfront about that and clear in your own mind, because sometimes decision makers need to actually check on things like, well, do I have the flexibility to go, let me check with my boss. The worst thing you can do is say, oh, this is all open for your input and for dialogue, and then to go back to exactly what the decision maker was going to do anyway. That is how you create cynicism about government and distrust in government. Just being really clear about what is on the table and what really is non-negotiable. And fair enough. Maybe it's a law, maybe it's direction that came from, the Prime Minister's office or what have you. The world has shifted to where employees, citizens, people generally have a greater expectation of being at least consulted on decisions that affect them. And so I think the norm of collaboration is good, but I think some people misunderstand that to mean, oh, I shouldn't really make any decisions. When sometimes what will enable collaboration is to be clear, make a decision. The decision might be about how that decision will be made. That's still a decision.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's very clear that the person in the position of authority needs to just decide something and not waffle on it. Helping leaders just have the confidence to go forward and make a decision. And sometimes I will coach them on that in advance of a meeting. Like, where are you really not willing to go? And okay, so that's one whole category of where you might need to shape expectations, being clear what's negotiable, what's not negotiable. And the other is just back to our earlier discussion, how much time is involved. And I guess I've been pretty fortunate to have clients that understand the need for in-depth preparation, especially if an issue is more complex or technical or conflictual or emotional. So I've been pretty fortunate, but even in that one meeting where I said that my point of contact, the sponsor, was really process-minded, even there, they kept wanting to pack too much in to one day's agenda. And I had to say, okay, reality check here. We just spent 35 minutes talking about this, and you're talking about it being a 30-minute agenda item. We're going to need more time, or else just scale back your expectations of what we'll accomplish in that time.
Yeah. And I think that's really important too, because we forget that even in a facilitated environment, it's kind of a different context than we're normally used to. And that strange context requires then that trust building. And you speak of that quite heavily in the book, and just then as well, this cynicism can arise if the trust isn't there and the follow-through isn't there. So what is the context? I like that. In chapter 6 of Extreme Facilitation, you talk about one of your mentors, Bernie Mayer, and how you had an insight specifically in relation to what they were paying him for was his judgment, his ability to know when to intervene and when not to, when to listen and when to step in.
Yeah. So I think the story I told in the book was the first time I observed Bernie facilitating, and he was just quiet for so long, and I was like, what are they paying him for? He's just sitting there. And then his interventions were so, it was like this little drop in a pond. Like, well, let me just say this little quick thing, and then it changed the whole dynamic. And I was like, wow,
And I think this speaks a lot to that aspect of our facilitation, which is around what I call the control of the thermostat. Do you let the heat raise? Do you lower it? When do you help to de-escalate? And when do you know that that's actually constructive conflict to build people into that stretch zone? What insights do you have for experienced or emerging facilitators to be able to hold that heat?
In terms of calibrating or turning, letting the heat go up or go down, I think you have to just get some feedback. You can even ask in the moment, so,
Yeah.
hey, that discussion got pretty heated. Are you all cool with that? Is that fine? Or do you want me to step in more?
I sometimes use that as a icebreaker post-conflict. Is it just the hippie here, or did you feel a shift in the energy there? Things
Oh, I
got
like that.
very real in that moment. And how are folks doing with that? And it brings them back to the moment to say, oh, actually, yeah, we were, but it's okay. Like I felt like something was achieved.
I love that.
It leads nicely to one of my next questions, which was you said in the book that most of us treasure our freedom and resist being told what to do. How do you use that, especially when you're working in some of those contested environments?
I take the approach, I guess I get this from the model of mediation, to provide good amount of direction on the process side of things,
Nice. Yeah.
but not on the substance. I'll just take a little detour for a moment because in the last 14, 15 years, I've been really getting more interested in peace processes.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, in the study of peace mediation, they don't really make that distinction between content and process, or at least it's not in the literature, which I think that's missing a vast range of what a third party can do in terms of providing structure on the process element. So after listening to like all the individuals I've interviewed, if I've done that, or at least the sponsor, I will propose, here's what I think I hear is the purpose of this meeting. And here's what I think I hear are the objectives for this session today. And here's what I think would probably be helpful in terms of ground rules, given what you've told me about the group and what its tendencies are. And here's how I propose to lay out the agenda for the day, with times attached. So I provide a lot. It's always subject to change. I will always be open to feedback and discussion about it. But most people I work with really don't have the luxury, and most people don't really have the desire to slowly co-create all of that with me. Now, if they object to something, or if two different factions within the group have different views of something, then sure, let's open it up and talk it out. I do provide that to try to fast forward it a bit. I'd rather be told, okay, wait, slow down. I'm not sure I'm with you on that one, rather than people going, when are we going to stop talking about what we're going to talk about and actually talk about it? That's a comment.
Get into it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of balances that structure and that self-agency as well then.
Yeah.
I've got self-agency within this context. I've got the ability to provide my contributions and my ideas within the structure that, yeah, I agree with. That makes sense. And you're the expert there. I like that.
Now, part of your question I think I didn't address, and that was given strong disagreement.
Yeah.
So we're talking about facilitation, but this is where mediation skills can enter the picture. In my experience, and also in some of the literature, to mediate, the more effective way is to have the people build something together so that they can live with it. There again, it's providing the process structure and then really digging as deeply as you can as to what's motivating the different sides of the issue and trying to get to what's the interest or even the deeper need behind people's positions. But the more you can get to those deeper levels of motivation, the more open the field becomes to, okay, then what are some options that get at your needs and interests as well as your needs and interests, the people on the other side? And so then posing that question, then you are inviting proposals that will bridge the divide. Yeah.
And that helps. That builds a little bit into a question that another of the chairs for the Australian Government Facilitators Community of Practice, Jamie Nichols, has. I might have Jamie ask that question.
Hey Suzanne, I'm Jamie Nichols from Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry in Australia. Suzanne, my question, within the government facilitation context on stakeholder groups on a policy, how do you frame the scope of the topic and what range of techniques would you use to help the group navigate the issues, specifically when strong disagreements or those difference in interests arise? Thanks, Suzanne.
One quick thing that I can add is empathy and just how important empathy is. When people are in conflict, it's usually because they have experienced or are experiencing some pain. And so while I don't have to buy into their demonizing the other side, I certainly can tap into that pain and show that I understand it and where it's coming from. Not just feeling that empathy, but expressing it is really valuable. Scoping an issue is actually a really important thing. I have not so far had the opportunity to facilitate anything on the topic of gun violence in America, which is a major problem.
Yeah.
I actually at one point tried to initiate a dialogue at the local level because it's been a hot topic here where I live. But it's also one that people have very strong feelings about on opposing sides. And I have thought about how would you scope that topic? Because if I were to say, hey, here's a dialogue about gun violence, well, those who really strongly support the right to bear arms might object to that and say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. So this is really about interpersonal violence. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So now, that's just if we were having a dialogue that I just convened myself. But if there were a particular law or regulation or some decision maker who came with a particular thing that they needed to do, then that would to some extent shape the framing. So for example, if a regulatory agency needed to revise a rule about permitting for gun purchases, then that would probably essentially drive the scoping of the subject. So, how to revive this particular regulation might be the initial framing, and then we might do a further framing in a more iterative way after the range of views and interests have been expressed. That might be something like, how can we revise this regulation so as to minimize impact on responsible, law-abiding gun owners, but to minimize guns getting in the wrong hands or something like that.
Yeah. As a facilitator, that exciting concept of how do we then help depolarize and bring people together to actually dialogue about these things, because if there's valid points on both sides, how do we get them to inform and merge into something that's good for the whole? Yeah. It's a challenge, and it's getting more challenging today, I think, because I think people just get wrapped up in a particular narrative that they are hearing over and over. And this is on the left and the right. It gets harder for people to open their minds to hear another perspective. How do we help people open their minds? How do we help them open to considered dialogue about views that might otherwise trigger their defensiveness?
I really, really, really wish I had the answer to that. I think some people are still more open-minded and interested in engaging, and there's a burgeoning new field of left-right dialogue groups. And the fastest growing voter registration is independents, but a lot of independents are more left-leaning or more right-leaning. They just don't like political parties. They don't want to identify with the party. So I'm not actually sure. One interesting thing that I've read is that actually it's the more knowledgeable and politically engaged folks who are more polarized. That was an eye-opener for me, because we want to believe that education is the answer, right? That if you inform yourself, you're of course going to be more reasonable. But actually informing yourself can mean feeding yourself more of a particular point of view.
And so that goes back to that echo chamber you were talking about with this is the one narrative. So am I informing myself of just my viewpoints, or am I informing myself of all viewpoints with which then to help influence?
Be open to learning. at a minimum, or at least open to appreciating where somebody else's view is coming from. We don't all have to agree, by the way. This is an open society. You know, this is what we treasure as people in democratic societies, is that you can have your differences of views, but that you express them in a nonviolent way.
Yeah.
So it's not about all having to see things the same way. It's about being able to coexist with our differences.
Yeah. This builds really nicely into a question that I've got for you around presence. There's a chapter towards the end of Extreme Facilitation where you talk about personal presence we have as facilitators, but how do we help it to bring out the best in those that we're serving, those other participants, to enable them to de-escalate enough to listen to each other?
Yeah, presence alone won't do that. But I do think that, and I have occasionally seen this comment in evaluations, they always see that I care. And it's because I do. You know, I get really absorbed in not just the issues, but I come to care about the people who are involved. So I think that care comes across without me having to really do anything. I don't think. It's just that I care. This is a virtue and a flaw, but I do believe that there's that kernel of good in everybody, but I think it's useful in my role as a facilitator or as a mediator to see the potential in people and to see that there is at least a part of them that wants to do the right thing, that has good values. When I hear those things, I try to bring them out. I try to highlight that, like, oh, I see you really see yourself as a person with a lot of integrity. And so what does that mean, you know, moving forward on this?
One of your mentors and friends, Bernie Mayer, he's spoken a bit about being an activist and promoting peace and protest. One of my mentors, Nick Houseco, he's got a question. I'd be keen to have us listen to him and hear your response on it.
Okay.
Suzanne, fantastic books, fantastic authorship. You've really stimulated my mind with some of the things I'd like to ask you. One of the first ones is consumerism and its grip upon our Western society seems to be almost suffocating our volunteerisms, our ability for people to support charities, community groups, volunteer time. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a big one, big one. And I would point out a couple of things. I think that it maybe is that different generations express their community mindedness in different ways. And I think that there is a trend towards having less trust of long established institutions. So I think I mentioned already the growing number of independents, registered independents in the United States. They don't trust the political parties. They don't want to be affiliated with that. We're seeing a resurgence of interest in labor rights and even unions, but I think the long-term trend with unions is even people who really, really support the rights of workers don't trust the unions as the entity or as the mechanism to advance those rights. People might believe in capitalism and free trade, but they have a lot of distrust of big corporations. And I don't even need to tell you about distrust in government, right?
Yeah.
That's a big one. So I think that's one factor, is that people might be contributing to their communities in less visible ways and without the tendency to join things as maybe there used to be. Also, people are finding communities online.
Yeah.
The first few years of social media, it was, you know, the answer to everything. And in the, you know, more recent years, we've been seeing the negatives, which are serious negatives. But the positives are still there too. And I'll just give one example. As a young mother, I discovered these, you know, online mom or young parent groups. When you have little kids, and especially the really little ones that are still taking 2 naps a day, you don't have much time to get out there and go to a meeting of anything, right? But while the kid's napping, you can get online and chat with some other moms in an online group. And we're seeing the impacts of that on policy. So prior to my having a child in the United States, we have Medicare and Social Security for seniors, but only in recent years are we starting to talk about universal preschool, universal health insurance for children, things like that. So I think it's actually the online communities of young parents that have enabled organizing around the interests of families with young children. Another example is The state I live in, Colorado, up until very recently had caucuses for each of the parties to select their candidates. Well, a caucus means going to some school or library and sitting in this meeting. It takes hours. I've never been to one. I never had the time. My parents went in retirement. Well, just recently we switched to primaries, which is much faster and easier for people with young kids. People are engaging in an online community there, and it can still be positive.
And it's not as surface visible, but it's actually making a difference in growing change and growing a sense of community in its own right, which is important.
One other last thing about community and engagement in the community is I feel like we're still psychologically and socially recovering from the pandemic.
Yeah.
I kind of have this sense that people sort of forgot how to get together, and maybe we just need to remember how to do that. People will always want to give when they can, if they have the time to volunteer, if they have the money to donate. And so I think economics is a significant part of this as well.
Which leads to our last question, which is around that piece of identity. How do you connect with that to guide your career? How can you engage with it to do good in the world?
My career is still evolving, let me put it that way. I'm still looking for ways to get involved in helping to prevent and end armed conflict. And I remain passionate about that. I just have a sense of purpose in my life. I don't know where it came from, but it is for me a calling. And I do think also that facilitation, conflict resolution, peacemaking, these are important services, and they should be compensated just like you would compensate a lawyer or an accountant or a psychotherapist or a doctor. So there's that, but it is very much a calling for me.
How do you foster the connection with the noble intent behind the profession as a tool for you to do good in the world?
Yeah. I have often used as an opening question in group processes, what motivated you to get into this line of work? It helps people reconnect with that motivation as you're talking about. What's the noble behind it? And it's not necessarily a given that people are in it for noble reasons, but I think most people are.
Yeah.
And so just giving them a chance to talk about it is one way.
Yeah, and I know I'm probably terminal in my idealism, but between the public service who serves the government of the day and the government who wants things from their department, there's this liminal space of conflict and friction. There is a noble purpose behind what the government does, and there's a noble purpose behind what the public service does in serving that. And how you can connect and blend, I think, is a really important concept for helping people overcome difference.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't want to sound too Pollyanna here about people in government in particular. I mean, like elected officials. There are some nowadays who just seem really intent on tearing down rather than building up. But I still think it's worthwhile to try to understand what is that little kernel of a valid point or a pain maybe that they're coming from, or a constituency that they're trying to serve. Try to find that little bit of good.
Suzanne, thank you so much for your time and your insights, and I'm really excited, hopefully, that this interview can help really elevate the book that you've written, which I find is a really valuable resource for facilitation and for those that want to make change and promote the noble intent behind the programs, policies, regulations that they do. How would people get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm open to receiving emails. My business email address is pretty public, so it's Suzanne, SUZANNE, @sghais.com, so SGHAIS.com.
Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hopefully talking to you again sometime.
I hope so, James. This was really fun, quite enjoyable.
All right, thank you.
You know, they say in horseback riding, you've got to fall off that horse 7 times before you're a good rider.
Ouch.
Yeah. And I think in facilitation, it's no different. Working my way through this jungle that had no path and just sort of trying to figure out what's going on. And I mean, we all see this part, right? But and meanwhile, I had acronyms flying at me and place names and individual names, and nobody gave me an org chart because it was really a lot of just figuring stuff out.
If you invest in preparation time for a facilitation, it's more likely to go well.
Funny how that happens.
Funny how that works.